Across the known galaxy, death had always been a remarkably civilized affair. When cardiac functions ceased, neural activity flatlined, and cellular regeneration stopped, that was it. Game over. Thank you for playing. Even the most belligerent species understood this fundamental law of biology. Once you're dead, you have the common courtesy to stay that way. The Kethmori had built their entire hunting philosophy around this simple universal truth. As apex predators from the storm-racked world of Velthara, they had perfected the art of efficient termination across 17 star systems. Their reputation preceded them like a funeral dirge, whispered in hushed tones across trading stations and diplomatic channels. When the Kethmori accepted a contract, the target was already dead. They just hadn't received the memo yet. Their ship, the Talon's Edge, hung in the void like a metallic spider, its hull designed to blend seamlessly with asteroid fields and space debris. Inside, the hunting pack moved with practiced efficiency through corridors lined with trophy displays, skulls, preserved organs, and other anatomical souvenirs from their most challenging quarry. It was quite the collection, though admittedly, most of their targets hadn't put up much of a fight once the initial shock wore off. The pack leader, a scarred veteran whose carapace bore the marks of 1,000 hunts, studied the holographic display with what passed for amusement among his species. The target was laughably primitive, a bipedal mammal from a backwater planet called Earth. No natural armor, no venomous appendages, no electromagnetic sensory organs, just soft flesh, wrapped around a calcium-based endoskeleton, as if evolution had given up halfway through the design process. Look at this pathetic creature, the leader chittered to his subordinates, gesturing at the three-dimensional image, rotating slowly in the air. It doesn't even have proper claws. How does it catch prey? How does it defend itself? Does it just ask nice? The pack's tracker, a lean specialist, whose compound eyes could detect heat signatures through solid rock, tilted his head thoughtfully. Intelligence reports suggest they use primitive projectile weapons and crude explosives, compensating for their physical inadequacies, presumably. Primitive projectiles, the leader repeated, mandibles clicking with derision. Against our adaptive shielding and regenerative armor. It's almost insulting that someone would pay us to eliminate something so mundane. Their weapons were by any reasonable standard overkill. Plasma cannons that could vaporize a small building, molecular disruptors that could unravel matter at the atomic level, and neural scramblers that could fry a nervous system from orbit. The Kethmori believed in overwhelming force. Why risk a fair fight when you could simply erase your opponent from existence? The target had been tracked to a desolate moon orbiting a gas giant, apparently attempting to establish some sort of mining operation. Alone, one single creature, isolated on a barren rock, armed with nothing more sophisticated than chemical propellants and stubborn determination. The contract specified a clean elimination, no witnesses, no evidence, no complication. As they approached the moon's surface, the leader felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. This would be simple, efficient, and profitable. The target would see them coming, perhaps attempt to flee or hide, and then, well, then it would be over. Quick, clean, and thoroughly fine. The ship's sensors painted a detailed picture of the mining facility, crude structures of welded metal and composite materials, power readings that suggested barely adequate life support, and a single heat signature moving between the buildings with mechanical precision. The target was going about its daily routine, completely unaware that death was descending from the stars. "Shall we make it quick?" asked the tracker, already powering up his precision rifle. A single shot to the cranial cavity should suffice. The leader nodded, approving. "Clean and efficient, we'll be back in orbit within the hour." They materialized outside the main habitat structure, their advanced technology rendering them invisible to the primitive sensors. The target emerged moments later, as if summoned by some cosmic sense of time. It was smaller than expected, wearing a bulky environmental suit that made it look even more pathetic than the intelligence reports had suggested. The plasma bolt struck center mass, the intense heat flash cooking organic tissue and boiling bodily fluids in milliseconds. The target collapsed instantly, vital signs flatlined, and all neural activities ceased. A textbook elimination, executed with professional precision. The leader allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another contract completed, another trophy for the collection. The universe was once again a safer place for civilized species, free from the minor annoyance of this particular primitive mammal. What happened next would fundamentally challenge everything the Kethmori thought they knew about death, biology, and the simple courtesy of staying dead when killed. But that was still 7 days away. The first sign that something had gone spectacularly wrong came 12 hours later, when the motion sensors around the mining facility started screaming alerts that shouldn't have been possible. The Kethmori had left the corpse where it fell. After all, why bother with cleanup when you're dealing with a dead thing on a dead moon? Dead things, by definition, don't move. The tracker stared at his instruments with the kind of expression typically reserved for discovering that mathematics had suddenly stopped working. Pack leader, he said carefully, the target's heat signature is active. Define active, the leader replied, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Ambulatory. Mobile. Currently dismantling one of the mining rigs with what appears to be a salvaged plasma cutter. The leader's mandibles clicked in irritation. Obviously, there had been a mistake. Perhaps they had hit a decoy, or the target had somehow escaped during the initial strike. These primitive species were occasionally craftier than their appearances suggested, though not by much. Visual confirmation, he ordered. The drone's feed materialized in the air before them, and several pack members made sounds that roughly translated to profanity in 17 different languages. The target stood in the center of the mining facility, its environmental suit torn and partially melted from the plasma strike. Through the gaping holes in the suit, they could see the devastating damage: carbonized flesh, exposed bone, organs that should have been cooked beyond recognition. It was very clearly, very obviously, very thoroughly dead. It was also very busily welding armor plates to its ruined suit, working with the focused intensity of someone who had a schedule to keep and wasn't about to let a little thing like death get in the way. I'm no expert on mammalian biology, the tracker said slowly, but I'm fairly certain that creature's cardiovascular system is no longer functional. The cranial cavity shows massive thermal damage, added the pack's medic, his voice taking on the clinical tone of someone desperately trying to make sense of impossible data. Neural tissue has been completely destroyed. There should be no electrical activity whatsoever. The leader watched the target attach what appeared to be a crude rocket launcher to its back, fashioned from mining equipment and explosive charges. Perhaps we didn't hit it hard enough, he suggested, though even he didn't believe it. Pack leader, the tracker said gently, we vaporized its internal organs. There's literally a hole you could put your fist through. The second attempt was more thorough. They used the molecular disruptor this time, a weapon that unraveled matter at the atomic level and left nothing but constituent particles floating in the void. The target simply came apart, its structure losing cohesion as fundamental forces forgot how to hold atoms together. For exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, the universe made sense again. Then the particles began to coalesce, drawn together by forces that violated several laws of physics, and at least 3 principles of common decency. The target reformed like some cosmic practical joke, its damaged suit now reinforced with salvaged hull plating and what appeared to be a homemade targeting system. That's not possible, the medic whispered, his voice cracking with the strain of watching reality bend itself into uncomfortable shapes. Clearly, it is possible, the leader replied, though his own voice had taken on a distinctly higher pitch. We're observing it happen. The third attempt involved the neural scrambler, a device that could fry every neuron in a target's brain from orbit. The target convulsed violently, its nervous system overloading and shutting down in a cascade of electrical failure. Brain death was confirmed, verified, and documented with the kind of thoroughness that would have impressed a forensic examiner. The target got back up 6 hours later, now sporting improvised armor made from mining equipment and carrying what appeared to be a weapon cobbled together from reactor components. It had also somehow acquired a heads-up display, jury-rigged from salvaged electronics and sheer bloody-minded determination. It's adapting, the tracker observed, his voice hollow with the realization that they were no longer dealing with a simple termination contract. Every time we kill it, it comes back stronger. Impossible, the leader insisted, though his conviction was starting to sound forced. Dead is dead. It's a universal constant. Tell that to the target, the medic replied, gesturing at the feed where the creature was now setting up what appeared to be a sophisticated early warning system around the mining facility. It seems to have strong opinions about staying dead. The fourth attempt was a coordinated strike using all their weapons simultaneously: plasma cannons, disruptors, neural scramblers, and every exotic weapon in their arsenal fired in perfect synchronization. The target was obliterated, atomized, reduced to component particles and then subjected to an electromagnetic pulse that should have scrambled any remaining electrical activity. The resulting explosion was visible from orbit, a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the local star and left a crater where the mining facility had been. Nothing could have survived that level of destruction. Physics itself wouldn't allow it. The target climbed out of the crater 8 hours later, its suit now a patchwork of salvaged materials and grim determination. It had somehow acquired a jetpack, built from reactor components, and was carrying what appeared to be a cannon fashioned from mining equipment and pure spy. "Pack leader," the tracker said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm detecting multiple heat signatures approaching our position." "Impossible. The target is alone." "Yes, sir. All the heat signatures are identical. It's all the same creature." The leader stared at the display, watching as multiple versions of their targets surrounded their ship with the methodical precision of a military operation. Each one was different, some more damaged, some more heavily armed, some sporting equipment that shouldn't have been possible to construct from mining debris. "How many?" he asked. "7, the tracker replied. "One for each time we killed it." The realization hit the pack like a physical blow. They weren't hunting a single target anymore. They were facing something that treated death as a minor inconvenience, a brief interruption in its schedule. Something that learned from each termination, adapted to each method, and came back stronger every time. Something that had apparently decided that if they wanted to play games with death, it was more than happy to teach them the rules. The first explosion against their hull was almost gentle, like a polite knock on the door. The second was considerably less polite. The Kethmori had spent centuries perfecting the art of being the hunter. They had never, in all their evolutionary history, considered what it might feel like to be the prey. The experience, as it turned out, was deeply unpleasant, and came with a generous helping of existential dread. The attacks began with surgical precision. The first target was their sensor array, cleanly severed with what appeared to be a mining laser modified for considerably less peaceful purposes. The second was their communication array, leaving them isolated and unable to call for backup. The third was their escape pod bay, because apparently their quarry had developed opinions about letting them leave. "It's treating us like we're the ones being hunted," the tracker observed, his voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose worldview had been thoroughly scrambled. This is what we do to other species." The leader would have found this observation more profound if he hadn't been busy watching 7 identical heat signatures moving around their ship, with the coordinated efficiency of a military strike team. Each one had taken a different approach to the problem of siege warfare, and they were all disturbingly effective. The first version had somehow constructed a crude but functional plasma torch from mining equipment, and was methodically cutting through their hull plating. The second had rigged explosives to their maneuvering thrusters, because apparently being stranded was part of the plan. The third was doing something unspeakable to their power conduits with a device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and pure malice. "How is it coordinating multiple versions of itself?" the medic asked, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to apply logic to a situation that had abandoned all pretense of making sense. "Maybe they're not multiple versions," the tracker suggested weakly. "Maybe it's just really fast." This theory was promptly disproven when all 7 versions appeared simultaneously on different sections of their hull, each working on a different aspect of their systematic dismantling. They moved with the patient efficiency of maintenance workers, as if converting a Kethmori hunter-killer into scrap metal was just another day at the office. The leader made the tactical decision to abandon ship. This lasted approximately 47 seconds. Which was how long it took for the escape pods to malfunction in ways that suggested someone had been anticipating this exact response. The pods opened properly, deployed their emergency systems correctly, and then promptly returned to the ship like well-trained pets. "It's hurting us," the tracker whispered, his compound eyes wide with a terror that his species had never evolved to properly process. "It's keeping us contained." The fourth version of their target had apparently decided that psychological warfare was more efficient than brute force. It had constructed a crude but functional communication device and was broadcasting on their internal frequency. The message was simple, repetitive, and deeply unsettling. The sound of metal being scraped against metal over and over again, like some cosmic notification that their time was running out. "What does it want?" the medic asked, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic scrape. "I don't think it wants anything," the leader replied, watching as the fifth version began attaching what appeared to be a homemade mining charge to their reactor housing. I think it's just finishing the job. The sixth version had taken a more direct approach and was currently attempting to breach their main airlock with a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from reactor components and engineering spice. The seventh was methodically documenting their ship's defensive systems, apparently taking notes for future reference. This was when the leader made his second tactical mistake of the day. He opened a communication channel. "What are you?" demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fear across 17 star systems and was not accustomed to being ignored. The scraping stopped. All 7 versions of their target paused in their work and turned toward the ship with movements that were perfectly synchronized and deeply disturbing. "Dead," came the reply, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, and carried the kind of finality that suggested this was simply a statement of fact rather than a threat. "You can't be dead," the leader protested, his voice rising with the desperate edge of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled. "Dead things don't move. Dead things don't think. Dead things don't build weapons and coordinate it." "Yeah," the voice replied, and there was something almost conversational about it, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the philosophical implications of post-mortem engineering. "That's what I thought." The first version had finished its work on the hull and was now moving toward the bridge with the unhurried pace of someone who had all the time in the world. The second had apparently decided that their life support systems were more of a suggestion than a requirement, and was making appropriate adjustments. The third was doing something creative with their gravity generators that was making everyone's inner ear very unhappy. "This is impossible," the medic whispered, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose scientific training had collided headfirst with cosmic absurdity. "Lots of things are impossible," the voice replied cheerfully. "Doesn't seem to stop them from happening." The fourth version had reached the bridge door and was examining the locking mechanism with the focused attention of someone solving an interesting puzzle. The fifth was still working on the reactor, apparently unconcerned by the fact that a containment breach would vaporize everything within a considerable radius. The sixth had given up on the airlock and was simply cutting a new door with what appeared to be a handheld plasma cut. "We're apex predators," the leader said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried just hours earlier. "We've hunted across 17 star systems. We've never failed to complete a contract." "Yeah, well," the voice replied, and there was something almost sympathetic in its tone. "Everybody's got to learn sometime." The seventh version had apparently finished its documentation and was now assembling something that looked suspiciously like a weapon designed specifically for hunting. It was crude, improvised, and cobbled together from mining equipment, but it was also clearly functional and aimed directly at their bridge. "What do you want from us?" the tracker asked, his voice cracking with the kind of desperation that comes from watching your species' reputation for invincibility crumble in real time. "Nothing," the voice replied, and there was something almost peaceful about it. "I'm already dead. This is just what happens now." The leader watched the seventh version complete its weapon assembly and realized, with the kind of clarity that comes from facing imminent termination, that they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their contract. They hadn't been hired to kill a primitive mammal from a backwater planet. They had been hired to wake something up, something that treated death as a temporary inconvenience, and had apparently decided that turnabout was fair play. The scraping began again, but this time it was coming from inside the ship. The final confrontation lasted exactly 17 minutes, which was long enough for the Keth Mori to experience every stage of grief simultaneously and discover that their apex predator status came with a remarkably comprehensive warranty that definitely didn't cover encounters with vindictive undead mammals. The creature, because calling it a target seemed inadequate at this point, had apparently spent the last 6 days studying Keth Mori physiology, with the focused attention of someone preparing for a very specific examination. It knew precisely where to strike to cause maximum psychological damage while keeping its subjects alive long enough to appreciate the irony of their situation. The leader found himself pinned to the bridge bulkhead by what appeared to be a mining clamp modified for considerably less industrial purposes, watching his remaining pack members being systematically processed by the other versions of their quarry. Each one worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been thinking about this moment for quite some time. "You know what the funny thing is," the creature said, its voice carrying the conversational tone of someone discussing a minor inconvenience, rather than a systematic reversal of galactic food chains. I was just trying to mine some more. Peaceful operation. Bothering nobody. The tracker, who was currently discovering that their own neural scrambler could be repurposed in fascinating ways, made a sound that might have been agreement if it had been filtered through less existential terror. But then you showed up, the creature continued, adjusting something on what appeared to be a Kethmori plasma cannon that had been significantly modified for personal use. And you killed me. Very thoroughly. Very professionally. Really impressive work, actually. The medic, who was being subjected to what could generously be described as a practical demonstration of their own molecular disruptor technology, managed to croak out a question. What? What are you? Dead, the creature replied matter-of-factly. We covered this already. But here's the thing about humans. We're really bad at accepting when something's over. Stubborn species. It's a character flaw. The leader's mandibles clicked weakly. Humans. Yeah, that's what we call ourselves. Not very imaginative. I know. We're from Earth, that backwater planet you were so dismissive of. And we've got this unfortunate tendency to keep going even when it's obviously time to stop. The seventh version of the creature had apparently finished its work on the ship's communication array and was now broadcasting something into the void. The leader realized, with the kind of horror that comes from watching your species' reputation being systematically dismantled, that it was sending a message to every Kethmori vessel in the sector. You're warning them, he whispered. Warning them? The creature sounded genuinely puzzled. No, I'm inviting them. This was fun, I'd like to do it again. The broadcast was remarkably comprehensive, including detailed tactical analysis of Kethmori weaknesses, suggested modifications to standard mining equipment for anti-Kethmori operations, and what appeared to be a standing invitation for any other hunting parties that might be interested in testing their skills against something that treated death as a temporary setback. You're insane, the medic gasped, his voice carrying the clinical assessment of someone whose understanding of sanity had been thoroughly recalibrated. Maybe, the creature agreed cheerfully. But I'm also very persistent. And I've got nothing but time. The leader watched as the creature began dismantling their ship with the systematic efficiency of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. Each component was carefully catalogued, examined and either repurposed or discarded based on criteria that seemed to involve maximum psychological impact. What happens now? The tracker asked, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had been completely demolished and rebuilt as a cosmic joke. Now, the creature said, attaching what appeared to be a beacon to their hull, you get to go home. Tell everyone what you saw. Spread the word. Make sure they understand what happens when you try to hunt humans. The beacon began broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, a simple message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Human hunting season is now open. Bring friends. The escape pods launched exactly 7 minutes later, their occupants traumatized, defeated, and carrying a message that would fundamentally reshape galactic politics. The Kethmori, apex predators of 17 star systems, had been reduced to messenger boys by a single dead human with a grudge and access to mining equipment. The testimony they delivered to the Galactic Commerce Authority was initially dismissed as combat stress and possible neural scrambler damage. The physical evidence, however, was harder to ignore. The Talon's Edge had been systematically converted into a monument to human stubbornness, its hull plating rearranged to spell out a message visible from orbit. The follow-up investigation revealed security footage from the mining facility that challenged several fundamental assumptions about the nature of death, the limits of biological resilience, and the advisability of accepting contracts involving species from Sol system. The footage showed the human dying repeatedly thoroughly, and with the kind of finality that should have ended any reasonable discussion of continued existence. It also showed the human getting back up, every single time, with the mechanical persistence of someone who had somewhere to be and wasn't about to let a little thing like catastrophic biological failure get in the way. The Galactic Commerce Authority's official response was to reclassify humans as a Class 12 persistent threat, and issue a galaxy-wide advisory that contracts involving Sol system inhabitants should be approached with extreme caution, preferably from a different star system entirely. The unofficial response was considerably more colorful, and involved several new curse words that roughly translated to the thing that won't stay dead when you kill it. The Kethmori Hunting Guild quietly retired from active service, and took up less stressful occupations, like asteroid mining and philosophical contemplation of the universe's apparently flexible relationship with the concept of mortality. The human, meanwhile, went back to mining ore with the same methodical persistence that had terrorized the galaxy's most feared predators. The beacon continued broadcasting its cheerful invitation to anyone foolish enough to test their skills against something that treated death as a minor inconvenience. The galaxy, in its infinite wisdom, decided that some invitations were better left unanswered. After all, there were some things that even apex predators were smart enough to avoid, and at the top of that list, filed under cosmic mistakes we will never make again, was a simple entry: don't hunt humans, they take it personally. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It was just considerably darker than anyone had expected.